Sirens howl once again, ripping people from their sleep. And by now, everyone knows exactly what to do. Grab your clothes, your documents, your thermos, and head for the underground. You must make it in time before death once again falls from the sky, shattering a theater, a hotel, or maybe your own home. And yet tomorrow, life will return to its schedule. Shops will reopen. There will be milk for tea. Famous actors will walk onto the stage to roaring applause. No matter how brutal the night was, it is not allowed to ruin the day. That is how it must be done, or at least, that is how it must be made to seem. After the Third Reich invaded Poland in September 1939, Great Britain declared war on Germany. What followed would later be called the Phony War, because for months there was almost no real fighting. British expeditionary forces were sent to France to support the Allies, but real battles were limited to minor clashes along the German-French border. In April 1940, Britain tried and failed to stop the German invasion of Norway. By May, Hitler had launched a lightning assault on France, which soon surrendered. British troops barely escaped from Dunkirk, leaving France alone to face the Reich. In this episode, we will talk about how Great Britain survived the terrifying air terror unleashed by Hitler, about blackouts, nights spent in the underground, about how the nation was held together by Churchill, by King George VI, and by the future Queen, about how the British avoided starvation, and what it truly meant to dig for victory.
So, Britain was swallowed by a new and oppressive reality. The country found itself essentially alone, while continental Europe was being torn apart by two totalitarian regimes. And the nearest possible ally, U.S. President Roosevelt, was only beginning to prepare his nation for war, and at the same time was in the middle of an election campaign. Then the situation grew even worse. In July 1940, what became known as the Battle of Britain began, a months-long, brutal struggle between German air power and the Royal Air Force. The German plan was clear. Their generals had calculated they would need about 2 months to dominate the skies over Britain, destroy airfields, and crush air defenses. Only then would a ground invasion begin, a landing on British shores and the capture of London. But fortunately for Britain, since as early as 1936, the task of organizing air defense had been placed in the hands of a meticulous and demanding officer, Hugh Dowding. He had been a combat pilot in the First World War. Armed with experience and vision, he created a single, integrated system that fused air defense and Air Force operations into one living machine. It included radar stations, observation posts, anti-aircraft batteries, barrage balloons, and a central command nerve center. The Royal Air Force met the enemy fully prepared. A shock the Germans had not expected. One of the Luftwaffe's top aces, Adolf Galland, later recalled, "From the very beginning, the British had an extraordinary advantage, one that we never managed to overcome. It came as a bitter shock to us. There was nothing we could do except launch frontal attacks against an exceptionally organized and determined defense of the British Isles." By September 1940, the Luftwaffe had abandoned the dream of total control of Britain's skies. Hitler, who until then had held back from more extreme methods, made a new choice: terror. He ordered the deliberate bombing of London and other major British cities.
The period known as the Blitz had begun, a name given by the British press borrowed from the German word for lightning.
On September 7, around 300 German bombers, escorted by more than 600 fighter planes, launched a massive assault on the British capital. Thousands of bombs rained down on the city. Docks, warehouses, factories, and nearby neighborhoods were swallowed by fire. Before people could even process what was happening, a second wave began after 8 in the evening and continued until morning. In just one day, more than 400 people were killed, and around 1,600 were wounded. The bombardment did not stop. The campaign of non-stop air raids lasted for 57 days, and the geography of destruction widened. German bombs fell not only on London, but also on Portsmouth, Coventry, Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, and many other cities. The goal was clear: to break British morale, destroy the will to resist, and drown the nation in fear and despair. And the damage made it all too real. People walked past enormous craters where red double-decker buses lay twisted like toys. Entire apartment buildings were burned hollow from the inside. In some areas, whole neighborhoods were wiped away. Germany also struck at the nation's symbols. In Coventry, a medieval cathedral was shattered. In London, a bomb ripped through the roof and then the floor of St. Paul's Cathedral. The authorities tried to protect the population. They built so-called Anderson shelters, brick structures reinforced with metal. But because they were unreliable, many people chose the underground instead. Even so, the subway could not hold everyone among London's population of over 7 million. Millions had no choice but to wait out the bombs in their own homes. The wealthy had another option: private Morrison shelters, metal cages inside homes that were strong enough to sleep in. Through it all, the British tried to keep their balance. By morning, they went back to work as firefighters were still pulling victims from the ruins. Just look at this milkman, smiling shamelessly at the camera. The British made a point of holding on to life, even in the face of hell.
During air raids, people played records and board games on the platforms of the London Underground. Despite curfews and blackout rules, restaurants and pubs stayed open. Theaters continued to perform. One man in particular played a powerful role in holding the nation together: Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister in May 1940. Churchill personally visited bombed neighborhoods, spoke with survivors and eyewitnesses, and delivered speeches on the radio that lifted the country's spirit. The royal family also refused to hide behind palace walls. They made a point of meeting their people face to face. Early in the war, government officials proposed that the king and his family be evacuated to Canada for safety. The answer was no. King George VI, in military uniform, and his wife regularly visited barracks, hospitals, and factories. The future queen, still just a 14-year-old princess at the time, spoke to Britain's children on the radio in October 1940, offering comfort and courage. In 1944, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, a unit of the British Army, the same service branch in which Winston Churchill's daughter had already served earlier in the war. To reduce casualties and destruction, in September 1939, the government imposed nighttime blackouts to make navigation harder for enemy pilots. But turning off the lights came at a cost. Traffic accidents and injuries rose sharply. Over time, the strict rules were relaxed. Lights were banned only during active raids. The government also decided to evacuate vulnerable groups: children, pregnant women, and those needing care, from crowded cities to the countryside. Of course, the adjustment was painful for both the families who left and those who took them in. War also transformed transportation, as resources were redirected to the military first. Passenger trains became fewer, and dining cars disappeared. In 1940, signs marking railway stations were removed, so enemy pilots could not use them for navigation.
Private car owners received gasoline only by ration coupons, and by 1942, fuel was completely unavailable to civilians. Travel within the country was not officially banned, but it was strongly discouraged. From autumn 1940, Germany launched an aggressive submarine campaign, attempting to sink enemy shipping. This severely threatened Britain's food supply, since the nation had imported more than half of its food before the war. Nearly 50 million ration books were printed and distributed, and food could only be bought with coupons. The government also created a chain of public kitchens, known as British restaurants, to feed those in desperate need. By 1943, 2,160 locations were serving around 600,000 meals every day. People were urged to grow their own food. Gardens appeared wherever there was space, on sports fields, along railways, in city parks. Even the famous Hyde Park was partly turned into farmland. The campaign became known as Victory Gardens, with its unmistakable slogan, "Dig for Victory." But the battle for survival had a dark chapter. When war was declared on Germany, officials could not predict the scale of the coming food crisis. Fearing shortages, they advised citizens to put down their pets, dogs and cats, because there might be nothing to feed them. A brochure was even issued, explaining how to kill animals humanely. Though it was only advice, not an order, hundreds of thousands of Britons followed it, frightened by wartime uncertainty. Later, the nation would fiercely condemn the government for it. After 57 days of non-stop bombing of London and other cities, by November 1940, the intensity of German attacks finally declined. Britain's air defenses had proven effective, and Germany failed to crush civilian morale. In December, U.S. President Roosevelt announced plans to provide Britain with military assistance. By spring 1941, the Reich turned its focus to Yugoslavia and Greece, and then towards the Soviet Union. On May 10, 1941, the last massive air raid on London took place, killing about 3,000 people.
In total, more than 40,000 Britons were killed as a result of the air terror. Around 1.4 million homes were destroyed or damaged. In London, the Parliament building was hit, along with one of the city's landmarks, the John Lewis department store. The famous London boxing venue, the Ring, the Carlton Gentlemen's Club, the Great Synagogue, and many other iconic structures were completely destroyed. And yet, the British people endured. They united. They survived the nightmare. And their country became the frontline stronghold in the fight against the Third Reich. London gathered the representatives of its dominions and the governments of occupied European nations, where they signed the London Declaration, forming an alliance against the Axis powers. A month later, Britain and the Soviet Union agreed to an alliance. In August, Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Atlantic Charter, which was later joined by the USSR and the nations who had signed the London Declaration. Years of war still lay ahead, but the greatest battle, the battle for the right to call themselves unbreakable, had already been won. The Nazis tried to take revenge. Until the final months of the war, they continued to strike Britain. From September 1944 to March 1945, the country was attacked with V-2 ballistic missiles, Hitler's so-called wonder weapons. They killed more than 2,500 people and wounded nearly 6,500. In 2005, a memorial to the Battle of Britain was unveiled on Victoria Embankment in London. One section is dedicated to those who endured the war on the home front. You can see farmers watching the air battles overhead, anti-aircraft crews passing shells, factory workers at their stations, St. Paul's Cathedral lost in smoke, rescue teams searching the ruins for survivors, a family drinking tea inside an Anderson shelter. And now we ask you, which moments from the American home front do you think deserve to be remembered? Tell us in the comments.